So, welcome all fellow Trojans. I'm super excited to be here and to give you guys the 6 secrets to self-employment success. Before I get started, I'm going to cover a little housekeeping. Sean Uray here is here as my wingman. He's from USC. Um, he's going to be monitoring the chat. He'll be dropping some links in the chat for other reference because I certainly can't cover everything I know about this topic in an hour. I'm going to pause every so often and ask to answer questions, but really my plan is to end the webinar early so that we can stop the recording and have an open Q&A at the end. Uh, First, though, before we even get started, make sure that you check in using either this QR code on the screen or that tiny URL that Sean keeps dropping into the chat. This is important so that the university knows how many people are participating in the Trojan Connects week so that they continue to do this sort of programming again in the future. Also, throughout this webinar, I'm going to be using some terms interchangeably. For example, instead of saying a self-employed professional all the time, I may say solopreneur or independent consultant or coach, whatever. Whether you're a freelancer, a coach, a consultant, or a fractional executive, all these keys that I'm going to cover will apply. All right, so I need to move some things out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. My screen is not big enough. I need to move my toolbar. Okay, there we go. All right, first, a quick introduction. I know there was a little bit of an intro about me when you signed up for this workshop or webinar, but here's my story in as brief as possible. I fell into self-employment over 20 years ago when I got laid off from Levi Strauss. Prior to that job at Levi Strauss, I had worked for PwC Consulting. And so when I got the news that I was laid off, I called a former PwC client and I said, "Hey, I just got laid off. Uh, do you, do you need any help? Do you got any projects? Do you need any help?" And he said, "Are you kidding? How soon can you get here?" So that first year, I made more money, worked fewer hours, um, lowered my effective tax rate, didn't have to deal with all the big firm BS, and more importantly, had more quality time with my kid. And I said, "That's it. I'm never going back to a full-time job." Well, it was full-time, what I was doing, but I'm never going back to a traditional job. So that was back in, gosh, 2004. And then about 5 years into that business, I don't know, I lose track of time. I started my first company, which is called the Proco Agency, which has been on the Inc. 5000 list twice. The Proco Agency is a matchmaking agency that matches self-employed consultants who specialize in organ effectiveness with Fortune 500 companies. As a result of growing that into a national multi-million-dollar business, I kept getting asked out for coffee and getting questions about how to be self-employed, how to be an independent consultant. And so finally, after being asked out to coffee like twice a week, frequently, I said, okay, there's got to be a better way to help more people. So two other self-employed friends of mine and we started an organization called PICA, the Professional Independent Consultants of America. And for the next 10 years, I coached hundreds, if not thousands of people to set up and launch their independent solopreneur businesses. Unfortunately, PICA is closing at the end of this month, but all my best thinking is now in the book, which I will share with you at the end of this webinar. So that's a little bit about my background. Before I dive into the 6 keys, though, I want to do a quick poll. So you can do it either with your phone or online. Let me see if I can find this. Where's the button for the polls? Okay, can you see this? Yes, you guys are pushing the button, so apparently you can't see it. Okay, we have 100 attendees online and we've got 76 responses so far. Most of you thinking about being self-employed. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can actually see the results, but we had 47% say they're thinking about being self-employed and 42% saying they already are, and 11% are doing something part-time, like a side hustle. There are actually, I often advise people to do, if you're going to make the leap into self-employment, to do it as a side hustle or to do some things in the background while you still have your full-time salary so that when you do make the leap to being self-employed, you already have a running start. But that's not in my notes, so we're not going to cover that today, but it is in my book. Oh, look, now I can share results. So anyway, that's where it came in. Okay. I think the poll just went away. All right, so let's get started and dive into the 6 keys of being successfully self-employed. Oh, wait, I had something else for Sean to do. If you're for those 47% who answered in the poll that you're still undecided about jumping into self-employment or you're thinking about it, there's an article that will help. It's called 9 Things to Consider Before Taking the Leap to Self-Employment. And Sean's
I
going to
dropped the
drop,
link.
you
I
dropped the
did.
link. Okay.
I did.
It's peakandnetwork.org/9 things. Okay, let's get rolling. All right. The one thing that all solopreneurs and wannabe-preneurs, people who have not yet taken the leap to self-employment, the one thing we have in common is we all get FUD from time to time. So that means fear of change, uncertainty about how to address the situation, and doubt about trying something new. When these emotions crop up, I refer to it as the FUD monster. I imagine this little creature sitting on my shoulder, whispering things into my ear like, what if I can't find more work? What if I make a mistake? What if I'm not charging enough? What if I'm charging too much? What if I fail? What if it doesn't work out? We all have heard this sort of self-doubt and self-talk before, and FUD is totally normal. As humans, we're hardwired to fear the unknown. Oops, hold on, I pressed the wrong button. We're hardwired to fear the unknown, and it's to protect us from dangerous situations, usually like from a charging client or from stepping off of a cliff. But when you're thinking about being self-employed or are self-employed, the FUD monster can control our limit our potential. It prevents us from marketing ourselves effectively, getting the rate we want, or even trying something new. To make matters worse, FUD never really goes away. So I've been self-employed for over 20 years and I still get FUD from time to time. The good news is that you can learn how to manage it. The first step is to recognize when you've got some FUD. And to do that, it's important to hear yourself think. So, sometimes, we get so caught up in the day and we have all these different thoughts swirling in our heads. Gosh, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I started the practice of spending 10 minutes every morning before I got out of bed, just breathing in and out. Some people call it meditation. I don't call it meditation because then I felt like I wasn't doing it right. But even just spending that 10 minutes has me grounded and has me be able to think and hear myself think throughout the day. Um, Sometimes, though, FUD isn't a clear thought, but rather an overall uneasiness or hesitation. In this case, watching your behavior is key. So if you've been putting off your business development phone calls, that's FUD. Or if you've been thinking about submitting a proposal to speak at a conference but don't know where to start, that's also FUD. The trick is to be aware of it so that you can address it. Once you've identified what the problem is, let's say it's uncertainty about how to do a sales pitch, then you can name it and tame it. The trick is you have to figure out is it a fear, is it uncertainty, or is it a doubt? And then once you've identified what the problem is, the next thing is to figure out, well, how can I learn more to make it less scary or to gain more confidence? Usually it's just a matter of doing more research and understanding what the fear is, and then doing more research to know how to address it. So the name it and tame it self-talk works for small bouts of FUD, but what if you're making a big, huge decision like leaving your full-time job to be self-employed? In that case, your FUD monster is going to be gigantic, and working through it takes a bit more work. In that case, I recommend doing a brain dump of all the thoughts you have about whatever this big decision is. Just write them all down as a list and then go back and look at each of those things and ask the same question. How can I learn more to make this less scary? Or how can I learn more to gain more confidence? Or how can I practice to have more confidence when I do this? So that's the number one thing when you're self-employed is dealing with this FUD monster. Like I said, I've been self-employed 20 years, still get fed from time to time. Let's see. I think that's it on the Fed monster. Any quick questions? I did just see that Akari says, "Will we have access to the slides after the webinar?" I don't know. Um, I oh, Simone's here. Yes, she says. Okay. I'm going to keep going and let Simone and Sean handle the chat. It's too distracting for me. All right. So number two, when I ask independent consultants how they found the two most recent projects, 90% of the time they credit personal referrals. So finding a good coach or consultant or fractional executive or whatever is like finding a good dentist. Most people ask someone they know for a recommendation. And this is why being known for something is so important, because then it's easier for people to remember you and refer you to their colleagues. So earlier I mentioned my story about when I fell into independent consulting and I specialized in org change management, particularly on big, hairy systems implementations, like the implementation of SAP or Oracle, things like that. So after I did my first project with that client, I was contacted for another 12 projects with the same company because that first project manager kept referring me to other people. And so after about the third or fourth referral, I asked her, I said, gosh, I really appreciate all these referrals, but how does this come up? How do you do this? And she said, well, it's easy. Whenever I'm in a team meeting, a staff meeting, or steering committee, and somebody says, oh, we're going to be doing, make this change, and it's going to be a big, hairy change for our salespeople, a big, hairy change for the employees, I tell them, wait, 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 wait. If you're going to be doing anything that involves a big, hairy change, you need to at least have one conversation with Liz Steblay. And they'd say, well, who's Liz Steblay? Why would we want to have a conversation with her? And Sally would say, just trust me, you need to have at least one conversation with Liz. So my key words were big, hairy change. Whenever she heard that phrase, that's when she thought to refer me. My point is that you want to be the person that someone thinks of when they hear about a certain problem or situation. And this is what I mean by being known for something. Figure out what your keywords are so that your name is always associated with that problem or situation. The clues here will help you to hone in on your specific niche. And Sean's going to put a link to an article that will also help. The article is called How to Develop Your Tagline to Win More Work. Just a quick word of warning, though. Many people think, I'm thinking most people think, that you might want to go to market as a jack of all trades or Jill of all skills, but the reverse is true. If you put yourself in your potential client's shoes, they want to hire an expert, not somebody who has maybe done it before. I used to run a boot camp for people who were just starting out, and this was the hardest thing people had to deal with or had to figure out is what was their niche? What were their keywords? It takes a lot of work and a lot of introspection. There's several tips on how to do this, both in the article that Sean's going to drop in the chat, or maybe you already did, and then also in my book. So before I go on, I'm going to pause to see if there've been any questions, and I need to take a sip of tea. So Sean, have there been any questions?
No, just I did drop the link, and also participant Erica asked if she could have order a copy of your book that's autographed. So I did drop the link about for ordering your book, but
Oh,
she would like it autographed.
oh, excellent. Yeah, yes, because I have a whole stack of them over here. So yes, please buy a signed copy. All right. So let's move on to key number three, which probably speaks to the biggest fun of all, and that's doing business development and winning more work. So as I mentioned earlier, nearly all solopreneurs find their work through colleagues and referrals. And this is because people reach out to people they know and trust, especially when A, they're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars or more on a consultant, and B, their reputation with their boss or coworkers will take a hit if the consultant or coach they recommend doesn't work out.
Oh,
Because you never know who is going to refer you or when, you need to constantly keep your network warm. Don't be that person who only reaches out when they need work or when they need something. I think we've all met somebody like that before, and you do not want to be that person. So you want to be more like Johnny Appleseed, who, according to American folklore, was a barefoot wanderer who started the growth of apple trees everywhere he went by continuously throwing out seeds. or maybe spitting out seeds, I'm not sure. But building a client list is a bit similar. So this is why it's important to build strong relationships with your whole network, not just prospective clients. Uh, One key point here is that so let's say I was doing uh, independent consulting work as a change management consultant. I used to network and develop my relationships with other change management consultants because if they were contacted for work and they were too busy, they'd say, "Oh, I can't do it. I don't have the bandwidth, but you should talk to my friend Liz." So I call that co-opetition. So it's not just prospective clients, but it's everybody that you need to build your network with.
Oh, and Liz, we have some questions here, if I may interrupt.
Oh, yes, go.
Oh, great. So, Michelle Vartan, she asked, what if, oh, scroll back up, what if starting a new business as a side hustle is not an option? For example, you have kids and your full-time job is too demanding. That's question one.
It's so right, I understand. I was a single mom when I fell into being self-employed, so believe me, I know about the demands. So a side hustle might not make sense. However, there are things that you can do before taking the leap to being self-employed, like setting up your business, like figuring out your niche, updating your LinkedIn profile, preparing your website, even if you don't make it go, even if you don't press the go live button yet. There's lots of things to do to prepare so that when you do make the leap, that it's, you have more groundwork and you're not flat-footed. There's more tips about this in my book, but yeah, sometimes a side hustle isn't possible.
Okay, and question number two, this is coming from Julie. She said, what do you do when a majority of your colleagues have retired?
Oh gosh, I am coming up against that now, actually. It's hard because they've retired, so they're not out there and able to refer you to new people. Then you have to think of new strategies, right? Like maybe it means going to more conferences or volunteering with other organizations or trying to hang out with younger people, frankly. So yes, that is definitely hard. One of my best clients from the Proco agency is she's retiring on May 1st. And over the last 15 years, whenever she's gone to a new job or a new client, I mean a new company, she's brought in my consultants through the Proco agency. And now she's retiring and I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to shore up this very steady stream of work when she retires? And I'm going to have lunch with her replacement before she leaves and build that relationship. So, but if they've already retired, they still can introduce you to other people. You just might have to reach out to them and say, "Hey, I know you retired, but I've taken the leap to being self-employed and I specialize in this. And would you be willing to introduce me to a few people that are still working?" But yes, that is a problem.
And also, Erica Stafford commented, you have to make new friends and be intergenerational when you're
Yes,
networking.
yes, 100% intergenerational. All right, so let me keep going here on this slide because clearly it's a little blank at the moment. So we're talking about building strong relationships with your whole network and not just prospective clients. So how to do this? So instead of thinking about how large firms typically do business development, because they have business development staff, they host webinars, they write white papers, etc., use an approach that's more suitable for solo professionals. For example, real estate agents are masters at this. So when I lived in San Francisco, at least once a week, I got a postcard listing a recent home sale in my neighborhood. And about once a month, I got a memo pad with the realtor's photo and their area of expertise at the top. And once a quarter, I got a postcard from a realtor that said, "These are the free events coming up in San Francisco in the next, this next few months." And that would go on the side of the fridge. My point is that realtors realize that name recognition and timing generate opportunities. And independent consulting and coaching is no different, right? Your name has to be out there. You have to have awareness. So this is why you need to be diligent about keeping in touch. And here's some of my favorite ideas about how to do that. So this is what I mean by keeping your network warm in every sense of the word is be thoughtful. So instead of thinking as business development as some strange and overwhelming task, think of it as taking little actions all the time to build and sustain relationships. It sounds easy, but life gets hectic. So here are some of my favorite tricks. The first is monitoring LinkedIn notifications. So here's a short story. Using this tactic, I developed a relationship with a man who was, at the time I met him, he was, I don't know, I'm going to say a director of HR. And we'd had one initial conversation just to get to know each other. I don't even remember how we met the first time. I think somebody I know introduced us, and we had a phone call. This was like even before Zoom. And then every time that he moved or got promoted, changed jobs or got promoted, I'd send him a little note on LinkedIn, like, "Hey, congratulations on your new gig. That's, super exciting." Or uh, sometimes he didn't even reply back, but it didn't matter. I kept over time, I just kept following him and kept pinging him, basically. Well, after about 5 years, I actually went back and looked at how long it took to do this. He was promoted to the head of HR at Cedars-Sinai hospital system. And because of that, all that time building up this trust and relationship, he felt comfortable calling me to ask for a referral for a consultant. And I ended up placing the consultant there. It was $380,000 project in 11 months. Now, it was essentially kind of easy because, you know, it was I was the only person he called to find the consultant. On the other hand, it took 5 months to build that relationship. Not 5 months, 5 years to build that relationship. But using LinkedIn net notifications is a great way to keep in touch. My second favorite tip is to create a recurring meeting invitation on your calendar just for yourself so that you're spending at least 30 minutes a week doing outreach and reconnecting with people. Now, this could be doing your LinkedIn notifications. It could be picking up the phone to call somebody and saying, "Hey, we haven't chatted in a while. I was thinking about you. What's going on?" Has nothing, none of these things have anything to do with sales. It's just keeping your network warm, building awareness and trust. Another one of my favorite tricks is to forward articles of specific interest. So when you're skimming information sources like your LinkedIn newsfeed or the HBR newsletter, when an article catches your eye, think of who else might be interested, and then forward the article and simply say, "Hey, I saw this and thought of you." It's a great way of keeping in touch, and you're not selling anything. And
Liz.
that, yeah,
Oh, sorry. We've got a couple questions here. Is
okay.
now a good time? Sorry.
Yes, yeah.
So for first one came in from Doris Redmond. She says, "I'm concerned that my consulting business focus is too niche, but in industry literature and LinkedIn, I read and see there is a need. Should I do a market study or is this a sneaky FUD?"
I'm not sure what she means by market study, but um, when you have a specific niche, I think it's usually a good thing because it's easier for your name to build awareness and credibility within that situation, right? But in terms of market study, I know a couple consultants that did this with really good success. And they would reach out. So let's say that you did, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, HR consulting. And you could reach out to the heads at CHROs that you don't even know and say, "Hey, I'm doing a market study or I'm writing a white paper on, the effect of AI on employee retention. Would you be willing to let me interview you for like 15 minutes?" And a lot of times the head of HR would say yes. And they had no relationship prior to that. And this was a way for the consultant to get their foot in the door, to start to make a new contact. And then and then they would work on, they would write the white paper and send it to the person. But it was a way for them to um, a non-salesy way to make new contacts with executives. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, but market study is often a good way to get your name out there and to get into dialogue with your potential clients.
Okay. And then question two of two currently. Lori asked, "Has loneliness been common on your journey? Or have you been able to spend time cultivating friendships?"
So my favorite phrase is just because it's called solopreneurship doesn't mean you have to do it on your own. Um, it can be. And that's why I used to hold office hours when I was when I was running Pika at the educational organization. And sometimes people, consultants would come in and just say, I don't have a specific question or problem. I'm just feeling disconnected. And so it's important to build a network, whether it's with other solopreneurs or other consultants, and just so that when you do start to feel a little disconnected, that you can reconnect with somebody and talk it through. So yes, it can be lonely and it can be isolating. Um, However, the next this is a great tie-in. My other thing for keeping your network warm is one person in person once a week, and this is a great way to fend off the loneliness for sure. So when I was on this big, hairy technology implementation projects, systems projects, sometimes we'd be working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. It didn't matter. At least once a week, I would ask somebody either from the systems integrator or from the client side or somebody on the project team, hey, do you want to walk down to Subway and get our lunch get our sandwiches together. Like I knew we didn't have time to actually go out to lunch, but when we walked to go get the sandwich, I wasn't talking about work. I was finding out more about them. How'd you get into this crazy line of work? What do you like to do when you're not working? Do you have kids? Who's your favorite sports team? Where'd you go to school? By creating those personal interactions with people and having them get to know you more personally, that's more likely it starts to create a relationship and trust, and hence the referrals. And then it's easier to keep in contact too. Um, I used to write everything down because, I was a single mom and working my ass off. And so let's say I went to lunch with, I know this guy's name just popped in my head, Juan Gaitan, who was a project manager. And I learned that, he has two kids and he lives in Oklahoma. I would literally write it down so that the next time I reached out to Juan, I'd be like, oh, right, he had the two kids and he lives in whatever his hobbies were or whatever. And it's just easier to keep in touch. In fact, just yesterday, I sent a birthday text to a former client. And in my notes, I said, I saw that he likes Legos. So I actually found one of those little GIFs or GIFs, I don't know how you pronounce it. And I said, with a little Lego guy. And so I texted to him. I'm like, hey, happy birthday. So that's what I mean about getting to know people as a person. And that's what leads to referrals. Any other questions before I go on?
Nope, nope. Currently, we're all caught up.
Okay, how are we doing on time?
We've got
Oh,
32 minutes that remain.
good. Yes. Okay, I'm talking pretty fast. Okay, so key number four is one that a lot of people overlook, but it's vitally important because it affects much you can charge and how you get paid. So as solopreneurs, we need to present ourselves not only as senior professionals, but also as business owners. So let's start at the most basic level. How do you think of yourself or describe yourself to others? Because words matter. There's a big difference between a freelancer, a contractor, a consultant, and a fractional executive. Well, and at the other end of the spectrum, gig worker, right? The further you go up that chain from contractor to consultant to fractional executive, the more you can charge. It's just the way the world works. So if you go to market as a contractor, that actually in the perception in people's minds is that you're almost like staff augmentation or work for hire. If you go to market as a consultant, that says, okay, well, this person's more of a problem solver and they have specialized knowledge. So my point is that how you think of yourself affects how other people and prospective clients are going to perceive you, how you're paid and how much you're paid. Okay, second, name your business, even if it's something simple like Middleton Management Consulting. Because using a business name increases your professionalism as well as your chances of being paid on a business to business 1099 tax basis. I'll explain why that's important. I think that's key number six. But tying these two points together, when you introduce yourself, I recommend that you introduce yourself as the founder and owner of your own business. For example, I'm Lisa Taylor, the founder of Taylor Advisory Services. Then the person's going to say, oh, that's interesting. What does Taylor Advisory Services do? And then you started the conversation. So next, I'm always surprised by how many self-employed people don't use a professional email address, and it drives me bananas because for $60 a year, literally you could be going you could be perceived as John at smithconsulting.com is instead of like gmail.com. Just it's like my pet peeve. When I get emails from people and it's like johnsmith@gmail.com and they're trying to sell me something, I just delete. I don't even read. So just do it. Just get a professional email address. Okay. Next, be sure to market yourself as a business on LinkedIn, in your email footer, etc. And also, if you don't have a website, you need to have one, even if it's a simple one-page brochure website. They're so easy to build these days, and it's table stakes, right? So you've got to have a website. Um, for tips on how to build a website, the hardest part about building a website is what words to put on the page. So Sean's going to drop into the chat
Just
um,
dropped.
an article that says tips on how to build your website, and it's full
And
of
we have a
key questions to ask. Yeah, Sean?
So sorry. We have a question as well. I dropped your link. Kelly Wynn asks, can you speak to the best way to approach business licensing, trademarks, insurance, and taxes, especially since lots of coverage rates are quite high in California?
So, okay, that's a lot. So read the first
Yes.
part again.
Sure, yes. She asks, can you speak to the best way to approach business licensing, maybe trademarking, insurance, and taxes?
Okay, trademarking, insurance, and taxes. I'm going to talk about taxes in key number 6. Trademarks, um, it's it's kind of a pain in the ass to get a trademark, but it's a registered trademark is what I'm trying to say. It's a kind of a pain in the ass. There are people that can do it relatively inexpensively. I've tried to do it. My partner is a lawyer, and when I trademarked my first business, the word Proco, we did it on our own, and it was such a pain in the ass. So the next time I wanted to trademark something to get a registered trademark, I hired somebody for like, I don't know, it was like $300 or something. So it's not, unless you have some really proprietary system or tool or something, it's not altogether necessary to get a registered trademark on something. And you'll notice on these slides, it says copyright Liz Steblay 2026. That's enough to protect the information in these slides from being ripped off, technically, right? You don't have to file something with the government to trademark something. If you want to register trademark, that's a big process. In terms of insurance, there's two different types of insurance. There's business insurance and, of course, health insurance. Business insurance has gone up. Like for my company, Proco, I think it went up 11% last year. Um, and most of it now is related to cyber insurance, and it is expensive. Um, the best place that I have found that has the most affordable insurance is called, oh God, it just flew out of my head. Um, oh, something with an X. Oh shoot, maybe I'll think of it in a little while. Um, oh, that annoys me that I forgot about it. But yes, if you just do a Google search, business insurance for self-employed business insurance, um, several different places will come up. Oh, I can just picture the logo and I can't think of the name of the company. I'm so sorry. Um, Business insurance, you don't necessarily have to have it. Uh, unless you're doing business with large corporations. Large corporations are going to want you to have professional liability, general liability, cyber insurance, workers' compensation, you name it. I once had a client ask for 9 different types of insurance. Um, and so I had to like research and find out that some of it was already embedded in our existing policy. But if you're doing business with smaller companies, you might not need it. It depends on your own how risk averse you are, of how many assets you have to protect, etc. Health insurance is a whole nother ball of wax, right? So there is nothing you can do to make that more affordable. My health insurance, I'm single in good health, It jumped last year from 850 a month to 1200. And I said, oh no, I am not paying $1,200 a month for health insurance. So I got what's known as a catastrophic plan. It's an $11,000 deductible, and I managed to get the premium back down to $860. But there's no affordable way to get health insurance when you're self-employed. That's why it's so important to charge appropriately. That's why rates have to be so high. It's because you have to be able to pay for that. Any other questions, Sean?
Nope, not at this time.
Not
Nope.
at the moment. Okay.
No, we're clear. We're clear.
Okay. So anyway, on the key number four, bottom line is you have to be a business and get paid like a business, which I'm going to talk about why that's so important when I get to key number six. But before I get there, key number five, let's go back to pricing, right? So you can afford your health insurance. So the the fifth key is to be confident and charge what you're worth and bill directly if you can. This is not in my notes, but I'm going to tell this quick story anyway. When it comes to being confident, so my company Proco agency, as I said, it places consultants with Fortune 500 companies. We once pitched four consultants to a medical device company, and it was, I don't know, I forget what the work was. It was, let's say, to develop a leadership development program. And three of the consultants were billing around 300 to 350 an hour. The fourth consultant put her rate in at $800 an hour. And we don't share the rates with the client in advance, but we tell them, we're like, okay, here are these four consultants. They can all knock it out of the park. They've all been doing it for at least 15 years. Their rates range from 325 to 800 an hour. We're not going to tell you who charges what because we don't want to lead the witness. Well, sure enough, the client picked the $800 person. And we asked that person, we said, hey, we know you're going in a lot higher than any of the other consultants were pitching. And she said, that's fine. I don't care. That's what I'm getting paid. That's what I'm worth. And sure enough, that's the one the client hired. Sure, her resume and her background was no better than any of the other three. She just had a lot of backbone and said, no, I'm worth $800 an hour. And she gets it. So this is what I'm saying. Confidence is everything um, when it comes to being successful and getting a rate that you want. But let's talk about some specific tips for how to do that. So everybody knows that pricing coaching or consulting services is notoriously difficult. But so here's some quick suggestions. So first, figure out your market rate. Because the key to any successful negotiation, actually, I took this class at USC, a negotiation class, and the guiding principle was he who does the most research wins. So the more research you do around market rates, the more confident you will be when you quote yours. One quick tip is that if you've ever worked as a consultant through an agency, their markup is typically 30 to 35%. So multiply whatever you were paid times 1.3 or 1.35, and that's your market rate. That's what a client has already paid for your services. Another way is to ask AI, right? What are typical hourly consulting rates for um, a business coach in Los Angeles metro area? But geography is important. Um, Next, do some benchmarking so that you know your rate is reasonable. And there's lots of ways to do this. You can talk with other consultants, do a web search, again, ask AI, but make sure that you're using a specific niche and a specific region because rates range depending on where you are or where the client is. It's just the way the world works. People who live in Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York get paid more than people who live in Boise, Idaho. It's just just the way it works.
Couple more
Another,
questions of, oops,
mhm,
sorry, Liz. Couple more
yeah.
questions. So Carrie asked, Liz, to copyright content, do you have to put the all rights reserved as you did, or is just the C with a circle around it for copyright acceptable sufficient?
I'm not a lawyer and I don't know the answer to that question, but I always put all rights reserved. So sorry, can't answer that
Okay.
one.
And then Stephanie Alvarez asked, is there a way to calculate your ROI, return on investment?
Uh, I don't know if this means your return on investment, like how much you've put into building your own business, or return on investment from how much the client is going to spend to hire you. Um, But that's notoriously difficult too, particularly in coaching or consulting. It's very hard unless you're doing something like operations, manufacturing operations improvement, where you can literally measure the output. Um, it's very difficult to measure ROI.
Okay. And then the next question from Justice Keaton. At what stage in a venture should you start seeking funding?
Oh gosh. Well, most solopreneurs are self-funded. And if you're actually going to be an entrepreneur and build a bigger company, that's when you would need funding. I actually don't know any self-employed people, and I know literally thousands uh, who have had funding. They've all bootstrapped it themselves. But if you're building an organization or a company with employees, or you're going to actually like produce widgets or something, uh, that's more of an entrepreneurial thing, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And then shall we hold the rest of the questions till the end of the webinar, or would you like me to continue to interrupt you as you indicated in your email? I'm getting some people saying, can we hold questions? And I feel, I don't want to interrupt you, but you told me to interrupt you at any time. So how, just want to check in really quick, do a pulse check. How would you like to continue?
It's 10:42, so, and I'm on key number 5. Let me get through this key, and then
Okay.
we'll pause for questions again.
Got it. Thank you.
Because maybe I'll preemptively answer some questions. So we'll see. Uh,
Understood.
so other tips for getting charging what you're worth and gaining more confidence. Let's see, we already talked about benchmarking. Oh, this one is my favorite. Quote a range instead of just one rate. This works like a charm. I did this successfully for years, and it literally worked every single time I did it. So what do I mean by this is that when clients, so I'd have like I called them an intake meeting where I'm meeting with a client and they're like, okay, well, this is our situation and blah 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 blah. And then they'd say, well, clearly it seems like you're the right person to help us with the situation. How much do you charge? So that's the big question. And I'd say, well, my rate ranges from 185 to 225 an hour, depending on the scope, duration, and complexity of the work. Scope, duration, and complexity of the work. Then I'd say, listen, you've given me a lot of information in this meeting. Let me go back, think through how I would approach it, and I'll get you a proposal by the day after tomorrow. And then I would quote it at, somewhere in the middle of 185 and 225, and they were always happy. Never once in 15 years did anybody ever push me to the lower end of the range. I don't know why, but they never did. So I usually ended up getting paid in the middle of my range, which is what I wanted to be paid, was what I thought was fair. In psychology, this is called the center stage effect. When presented with choices, people gravitate towards the middle. So quote a range, but you have to use quote the range with confidence. The one time I didn't quote a range and I just went to the quote of my top rate, 225 an hour, that brings me to my next point. Is consider the client's urgency and their other options. So I was in this intake meeting with this client. It was at a medical device company in Silicon Valley. They were about 40% of the way through their project life cycle of implementing Oracle. And they hadn't done anything related to change management. And the stress from the program director was palpable. And I said to him, I said, I bet you got people coming by your office a couple times a week saying, are there going to be layoffs or how's this going to affect my job? And he looked at me like I was walking on water. He says, how do you know that? And I said, because I've been doing this a long time. So my point is that his stress was so obvious. He says, well, can you help us? And I said, yeah, I can do an assessment of strategy and plan in 3 weeks. My rate's 225 an hour. And he said, great. How soon can you start? So that was the only time I ever went to the top of my range. In retrospect, however, I should not have done that. I still should have quoted a range, but I should have quoted it higher. And I still should have said, let me get a proposal back to you in the next couple of days. Because his other options, his other options were limited. He didn't have any other options. He wasn't talking to anybody else. The systems integrator that was actually implementing Oracle didn't have any change management capability. And if I thought about it, the systems integrator was a large consulting firm called Capgemini, and I know what their rates were. They're way higher than 225 an hour. I could have made 250, 275 easily. So consider the client's urgency and their other options. Um, the other idea for getting the rate you want is think about uh, what is this number say? I can't see my own screen. Factor in the client size and industry. Yes, before you even go into the meeting, think about if they're a large company and what industry they're in. So, for example, if that's a Fortune 500 company, they're used to working with McKinsey's, Accenture's, and Deloitte's of the world. So their price sensitivity is going to be a lot lower. They're going to be used to paying higher rates. Also, conversely, if you're going into a small startup, they're going to be not used to hiring consultants and they're not going to be used to paying very much money. Uh, More importantly, though, think about the industry, right? I did consulting work once for a supermarket chain. Their operating margins are about 2%, very price sensitive. I've also done work for pharmaceuticals. Their operating margins are about 80%. They're throwing money around. Same with certain tech companies, right? So if you think about this before you even go into the meeting, you can adjust your range up or down accordingly, right? So if my typical range was 185 to 225 an hour, and I was going in to talk to a medical device company, I think in advance, you know what? I'm going to tell them my range ranges from 200 to 275 an hour because I know it's their industry. So that's another way to get the rate you want. Another favorite trick of mine is to reframe the equation. A lot of times a consultant, this is particularly for consultants, but a lot of times a client has a budget in mind, let's say $5,000 a week or $20,000 a month. Uh, this means that they can get a junior consultant at 125 an hour full time, or they can get a seasoned consultant for $250 an hour for 20 hours. Now, by getting a senior consultant, they don't have to do as much hand holding. The person's coming in with tools and methodologies and lots of experience, and it's just going to be a lot more efficient. You're getting $250 an hour, and they're getting higher caliber talent. So that's what I mean by rephrase the equation. And last, be prepared to explain why consulting rates are so high. This is particularly true if you end up consulting with smaller companies or startups. They might say, wow, $300 an hour or a budget of, $20,000. That seems like an awful lot. And you say, listen, I know it seems like a lot, but I'm running a business and I've got to pay for, business insurance and um, my overhead and my own health insurance. Everybody knows health insurance is expensive, so that is a great way to end the conversation quickly. So last, remember there's lots of different ways to price your work besides by the hour. You could use a day rate, a fixed rate, a hybrid rate where you're doing a fixed fee for, let's say, the assessment and then an hourly rate for implementation because you don't know how long that's going to take. Or you can use a blended rate where you have one rate for working on site, one rate for working from home, etc. There's lots of different ways and combinations. There's a lot more detail in my book about this. Um, but no matter how you price your services, the important part is to do your homework, do your benchmarking, and go in with confidence. Going back to that story I told you about the $800 an hour consultant. So I'm going to take a sip of tea, and Sean, you can tell me if there's more questions.
Okay, great. Okay, so we do have a question. Let's see. Someone had asked, what if you haven't, going back a little bit here, what if you haven't come up with a name yet to set up for a professional email? Is there a suitable example like your name.work@gmail? So I think she's essentially asking, can you still use Gmail, but just put your name and then a dot and then work for whatever it is your field is at gmail.com.
Technically, yes, you can do it, but from a perception point of view, no. It's still at Gmail, right? That still tells me that you're like sort of half-assed doing something, right? When you can, the finding a get buying domains is hard, but no matter who you are, you should go buy your own domain for your name before somebody else does. right? So I owned lizsteblay.com. I bought that like 10, 15 years ago before I even knew what I was ever going to use it for. And yeah, if you have a common name like Mike Smith, that's going to be a little bit harder. Uh, but, you know, a lot of you like Alexander de Leon, which is one of the first names I just saw when I looked at the attendee list here. I'm sure alexanderdeleon.com is probably available. Domains are cheap, so go buy it. So going back to that questions about Gmail, I wouldn't do it.
Okay. And Sumit asked, are you seeing clients trying your total compensation for a project to actual outcomes of the project? So let me repeat that. Are you seeing clients tying your total compensation for a project to actual outcomes of the project and not just to billable hours? How do you tackle this?
Yes, it's not as common as you think, actually. Um, Now, there was a consulting guru from the last century named Alan Weiss who used to say that if you're charging anything but a fixed fee, that you're an amateur and that you're leaving money on the table. And I 100% disagree. The reason is that if you charge by the hour, it's easier. That's what one, a lot of clients are used to that. And two, if you don't know how long something's going to take, it's it's gives you some protection. Like if you quoted a fixed fee for something for $20,000 and you thought it was going to take 20 hours, but instead it takes you 40 hours, you're screwed, right? So that's why billing by the hour or day rate is just gives more flexibility and it also protects the client too. So actually of the hundreds and hundreds of consultants or even thousands of consultants that I've coached over the last 10 years, um, some do fixed pricing, but it's more like a package. It is not tied to outcomes. If a client wants to tie it to outcomes, I would say do a hybrid rate where you'd say, well, normally, my rate's, $350 an hour, but I understand that, being a startup or whatever, cash might be a bit of a problem for you right now. So let's look at this a different way. What if I lowered my rate to half of that, and then I took a 2% bonus when your sales achieve XYZ, when we achieve whatever the objective is? I would never put all my eggs into an outcome basket because one, you need cash flow and you can't wait till 6 months later when the objectives are achieved. You need cash flow now. Um, and and two, the idea just flew out of my head. I think it was mostly about the cash flow. Oh, and the other idea is that when you're tied to key objectives, who's measuring those objectives? You're probably not measuring them, the client is. So it's a really out of your hands to make sure that A, they're doing what you recommend that they do, and B, that they're measuring the right objectives and they're measuring them in a fair way. So I think being paid for performance is risky. Any,
Okay.
any other
Oh,
quick
sorry, go
questions?
ahead. Yes. And then Tina asked, how do you go about billing a day rate? Or I think she means daily rate.
Yeah, it's similar to like an hourly rate, right? Um, it depends on the type of work. It depends on the type of client. Actually, European clients prefer day rates over hourly rates. But so let's say if you were $200 an hour, 200 times 8 would be $1,600 a day. You could either um, go up or down from that. Some people say that they charge like $1,600 a day, and they do it simply because it's easier than it feels like they're not nickel and diming a client. They don't have to keep track of 15-minute increments or 10-minute increments or like lawyers who do 6-minute increments. And it depends on the type of work though, because would you be literally on site for if you're on site for a day, that makes sense. If you're working from home, it might make a client uneasy for a day rate. Um, there's actually a book that I'm going to recommend. It's not my book, which I will be recommending in a minute, but this book by Kate Dixon, Name Your Price. You can see I've got little tape flags on it. Um, this, if you really want to get confident and really good about pricing, this is the book. Any other quick questions there, Sean?
Yes, one other one from Kevin. He says, what are your thoughts on a professional remaining independent with their own firm versus the trend to more wholly integrate with a few different clients as a fractional executive.
Yeah, fractional executive work is really gaining in popularity, and I'm convinced it's going to be the future for middle market companies because they need strategic talent, but they can't afford the $500,000 a year salaries. I recently wrote a blog on fractional leadership roles, how to become a fractional executive, etc. You can find it on my newsletter on LinkedIn. So if you go to my name and the newsletter is called on LinkedIn, it's called Solopreneur Success. And I think I published that blog, I don't know, 4 months ago, 5 months ago. It's gaining popularity. The really cool thing about being a fractional executive is that you'll have anywhere from 2 to 3 clients, and so you're not working a full 40 hours a week, but you're making a 40-hour week salary because you're charging a premium because they're only hiring you for a fraction, right? So let me see if I can explain this another way. If you had 5 clients, you would bill each client 20% of your full-time salary, what you wanted to be paid, right? But because you're only going to have 3 clients, you're going to charge each of them like 120%. You're charging a premium. Anyway, I'm a huge fan of fractional executive work, and go to the blog. I'm much more articulate in the blog. Okay, I better roll to key number 6 because somebody had a question earlier about taxes, and um, it's one of my favorite hashtags, hashtag pay less tax. Um, so a large part of being successful is making a profit, obviously, and hand in hand with that is to keep more of what you earn. So most people probably already know that there's 2 ways to get paid in the United States. One is on a W-2 basis as an employee, and the other is the 1099 business to business tax basis. When you're self-employed, you definitely want to be paid on a 1099 business to business basis. That's why I've trademarked the phrase, friends don't let friends W-2, because this is the goose that lays the golden eggs. One is, okay, you can take advantage of business owner tax deductions, which adds up. But anytime I order anything from Staples, I have my fast track charged to my business credit card. Anyway, all those business owner tax deductions, your health insurance is tax deductible. It all adds up. But the real golden nugget is saving more for retirement by contributing to a SEP IRA or solo 401k, because the limits are, I don't know, $35,000, $40,000 higher than a traditional 401k. And the thing is, every dollar that you put in to your own retirement account lowers your taxable income 1 for 1. So my favorite trick, and I did this for years, is every time a client paid an invoice, I put, I started out at 50%, then I backed out to 40%. I put 40% of that invoice, that payment, into a separate bank, not my normal bank, because if I log in and I see that I've got $10,000 in savings, I'm going to tell my daughter, hey, let's go on vacation, because I have no fiscal discipline whatsoever. So I put every client invoice I got paid, I put 40% into another bank. When it was time to pay my quarterly tax, I transferred the money from secret bank to my normal bank and pay my quarterly taxes. Time to do my annual tax return, lo and behold, there were $20,000 to $25,000 left over in the secret bank. That's what went into my SEP IRA, lowered my taxable income by $20,000 or $25,000. I invested that money over time, and I stopped contributing to my retirement account about 10 years ago. So funnel that money away. There were times when money was tight, when I was between projects, right? And I'm like, oh, shoot, I need to borrow money from the secret bank. I'd put a sticky note right on my computer that says, you owe secret bank $5,000. And then the next time a client paid an invoice, I made myself whole again in the secret bank. But that's how you save money and build wealth over time. But you have to be paid on a 1099 basis to do this. If you're paid on a W-2 basis, it doesn't work. I'm super passionate about this topic. Could do a whole separate webinar on it, but let's just leave it at that. There is a link actually with more information, so Sean can drop this in the chat. How to pay less taxes as a solopreneur. Um, so Sean will drop that in the link in the chat for you.
Yes, I dropped it in. Yep, sure did.
Okay, so even though this webinar is called Six Keys to Successful Self-Employment, there's a final bonus key, and that's exceed expectations. See, you're expecting six keys, and now I'm providing you seven. But this is so important when you're self-employed. Your reputation is everything. So there's cardinal rule in consulting, especially under promise and over deliver. Um, so this comes to managing, uh, all of these tie together actually, managing expectations and be mindful of what you're committing to. So for example, um, this was many years ago, my daughter was little. I said to a client, oh yeah, I can, I'll have this for you by the end of day today. And then something happened and I had to take her to the emergency room and we got home at like 10 o'clock at night and I still had to finish that damn thing for that client. But I'd said I'd have it to him by end of day, so I worked half the night to get it done because you have to keep your word because that's what leads to referrals and repeat business. So, exceeding expectations and maintaining your reputation is vitally important. Okay, so that brings us to all of six keys, but there's a lot more information in the book, particularly how to do something is more in the book. Today we talked about what you need to do. How to do it is actually in the book. Succeeding as a solopreneur, it's a little bit hard to spell, so the easiest way to find it is to go to sixkeys.info. My name's hard to spell too. It's available as an ebook, audiobook, hard copy book, etc. All right. Also, Sean, I want to remind people to check in uh, so that the university knows how many people participated. And so if you could put that in the chat too, that tiny
Yes.
URL to sign
Hmm.
in. So if you guys didn't do that yet, please do so. Oh my God, look at I took it the whole hour because we answered a lot of questions along the way. I'm going to stop the recording and I can hang out for another 10, 15 minutes and answer questions. So thanks for joining and fight on.